automotive is incredibly competitive. And so if everyone is using AI and the data set is the same for everyone, then what's going to be differentiated if everyone uses the same thing? And so that's why I think you have to have a very clear view of who you are as a brand. And then these become enablers and tools, but you still need that creative mind. You still need a strong point of view as a brand and as a marketer in order to kind of fully leverage that capability.
Welcome to Building Better CMOs, a podcast about how marketers can get smarter and stronger. I am Greg Stuart, the CEO of the nonprofit MMA Global. And that voice you heard at the top is Allyson Witherspoon, the Corporate Vice President and Global Chief Marketing Officer at Nissan. Now, she's been with Nissan companies since 2013 and in the CMO job specifically since November of 2020. And Allyson has spent her whole marketing career around automotive, working on campaigns for companies like BMW, Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, Infiniti, in addition to Nissan. Today on the podcast, Allyson and I are going to talk about what's really different about working in Japan, which is where she's based, the role of AI in auto marketing, and the art of an impactful creative message. Now, this podcast is all about the challenges marketers face and unlocking the true power that marketing can have. Allyson Witherspoon is going to tell us how she did that right after this.
This episode is brought to you by Jira. Jira is the only project management tool you need to plan and track work across any team. So if you're a team of developers, Jira better connects you with teams like marketing and design, so you have all the information you need in one place. Plus, their AI helps you knock out the small stuff so you can focus on delivering your best work. Get started on your next big idea today in Jira.
Kroger Delivery has one mission: to deliver the freshest food right to your door. That's why our drivers are pros. Our trucks are refrigerated. And when it comes to low prices, we always deliver. With $20 off your first order of $75 or more, there's no better time to get in on the action. Mission accomplished. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Allyson Witherspoon, welcome to Building Better CMOs.
Thank you. Hello.
So nice. And just to be really clear, I mean, nobody can see this. You're in Tokyo, or at least in Japan.
I'm in Japan. Yeah, so I am 11 hours ahead of you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's the future here. Yes.
Nice. Exactly. Well, hey, I should have called you yesterday to know that the Fed rate was going up today.
I know. Yeah, because no one knew that. No one knew that.
Okay, that was maybe the world's worst kept secret. I guess you're right. Listen, though, but Allyson, this is funny. So listen, in case the reader or listener wasn't paying any attention, Allyson Witherspoon is with Nissan. She's a global CMO. And as we're going to find out, she has probably more automotive experience than I think any marketer I've ever met, and a great variety of those. So we'll get into that. But this is your second time in Japan, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm on my second overseas assignment. So I was here in 2017 and 18, and I was the number 2 to the global CMO at the time. Mm-hmm. And then I moved back to the US, and I was the US CMO there for 4 years. And then I moved back I don't even remember what year it is, but I moved back last year in 2023. So I've been global CMO or US CMO for a total of 6 years at Nissan.
Right. Wow. Was there mandatory 5 days in the office there in Japan, by the way, post-pandemic?
No, actually, this is what's interesting. When I came back, Japan was actually very late to open after COVID. And so I think Japan really didn't open until April of 2023. And if you think about that, that's almost 2.5 years after most of the rest of the world. And so it was really interesting when I came back. There had still been kind of full-time work from home, except for some of the executives. And so in Japan, we started the process, which I had already experienced in the US, of, how do you start to integrate more in-office meetings? How do you bring people back? So I would say my team is in the office around 2 to 3 days a week. And this is the learning, I think, when we all went through, how do you start to come back from COVID lockdowns? But what I learned is that, and I felt it myself, is that people want flexibility. They want to be able, like if you have a doctor's appointment, if you need to drop your kids off at school, like it's okay.
It's what's going to happen, right?
It's going to happen. And then also, sometimes I have overnight calls with, different regions around the world. And I do that from home. It's no longer the time or era where you have to be in the office doing some of those things. So I like to promote flexibility. I think I'm generally in the office 5 days, but that's just because of when the big boss calls you in, you got to go.
Yeah, and I like an office. I like the environment of office. I'm a
Yeah.
big go to office. In fact, I kind of joke sometimes. Like, I don't want if I work from home, then I have to get involved in dishwasher repair, and I'd prefer not to get involved in dishwasher repair if I can help it.
Yeah, exactly.
That means I am pushing it to somebody else who does. So I don't, maybe a kid. We'll see.
Yeah.
But no, I think this recording will probably come out a couple of weeks after, by the time it actually goes live. But this was the week that Amazon announced mandatory 5 days in at work come January 1st. So.
Yeah. And I think things are shifting. I think it's a completely different time. I think there are a lot more expectations. Economy is in a different place than it was a few years ago. And so I think it was inevitable that it would happen. I think my philosophy kind of moving forward is going to still be this flexibility. We know how to do things virtually. So what I try to do is maximize the times that we're in the office for team collaboration. And if it's a bunch of people sitting on Teams or Zooms, I don't see that being very productive. But as part of coming back from COVID, we actually completely redid the marketing floor that the team is on. And so
did you? Oh, wow.
In Japan, very different than other parts of the world, but typically only corporate officers have offices. So everyone else is in kind of open seating, and it was very sectional. So now we have one side, which is hot desking, and the other side is completely open space, screens, large meeting tables, and everyone, for the most part, moves to that side to just even do, emails and things. And it's great. And there's a buzz, there's energy, people are working. It's great.
I've been in offices where you really feel the buzz, and it's like, oh, I really love that. I love that. Yeah. Listen, my team is pretty distributed. MMA's in like 16 different countries now. It's working all over. Okay. So back to my original point though.
Yes.
You are the automotive maven. I mean, so I don't know. You want to list all the automotive brands you worked on. Started with Mercedes.
All right, let's go. Let's go. I was a consultant for Mercedes. So I consulted on B2B, so how to communicate product, technology with the dealers. And then I just became kind of this jack of all trades. So I just started picking up other projects at Mercedes and consulting on a lot of them, on the marketing and sales side, product marketing. And then I went to Mercedes agency, so Merkley and Partners. So I was there. And then I went to BMW's agency, which was Kirschenbaum, Bond, Senecal and Partners. So I was there. And then I moved to both brands. Obviously, they're international brands. At BMW, we became the agency of record globally for BMW. And so I was spending a lot of time in Germany, and I really enjoyed thinking about global problems and how do brands show up globally. And then an opportunity came up at Volvo's global agency, which was Havas at the time. So I moved to Amsterdam because the global agency team was based in Amsterdam. So I led the global agency team. And at the time, it's so funny to think back on it now, but at the time, Volvo had just been bought by Geely, which was a foreign car company, China was an emerging market. And now, obviously, it's the preeminent automotive market. And so learning a lot about that style and also just how to manage teams globally was really a good development for me. And then I got a call that I always say changed my life, because I had been consulting or agency side up until that point. And then Nissan called me, and they were looking for a head of marketing for the Infiniti brand. Right. And so I moved from Amsterdam, Netherlands to Nashville, Tennessee, Yep. And I had never been to Nashville before. And I led the Infiniti brand for 3 years. And then I took a global assignment on the global marketing team in Japan. So I was here for 2 years and then moved back to Nashville for 4 years and then back here.
Yeah. Wow. And listen, you're also one of the rare people too who actually has a degree in marketing, which I don't see an awful lot. So listen, I'm kind of curious though, given all the experience you have, especially with the international, is there some point in time where you've gotten like what you thought was really exceptional advice? Like, can you recall like a great piece of insight that somebody gave you? It could even been something you read, maybe, I guess, but that somebody shared with you an experience. You have such a diversity of cultures there that you've dealt with.
I think on diversity and culture, the biggest piece of advice that I got, and Nissan, when I took my first foreign assignment in Japan, they actually had me meet for an entire day with a sociologist, and they were there to help get me ready to
Oh,
come into a
wow.
completely different culture. Yeah, it was fascinating. And I
Very smart.
really appreciate it. Thank you, Nissan.
Yeah.
But she told me, and she's an expert in working with in Japan and also female leaders because the gender dynamics here are quite different. She told me, she goes, whatever made you successful in Europe and in the US is not going to work in Japan.
Just flat out.
And I was like, go on, go. This is my flight is in a week. Like, what am I going to do?
What does she mean by, yeah.
She meant that it is such a different culture that in the US and in Europe, we lead from the front. Leaders lead from the front and the teams follow you. And that's kind of, you can give feedback in the moment, you can coach in the moment, and that's constant ongoing performance feedback. And in Japan, you have to do what's called push from the side. And you need to give the teams a direction and what the vision is. And then they need to figure out how to get there, because it's really important for the teams to buy in, because if they don't, it collapses. They don't respond to kind of top-down mandates. And so you have to find this balance of giving direction, giving them enough room and empowering them to find their own way, and then kind of pushing from the side to make sure that they stay on track. It's a very different style. And I think it's something that I have to constantly work out, even as I've come back, because just top-down things, they have a way of imploding. If the team either doesn't understand or they don't agree with it, they'll never say that to you because it's also a very hierarchical culture.
Yep.
And so you kind of you fall into these traps a little bit. And so you have to find your way out of them. And I also think, like, when I came back to the US after I was in Japan the first time, the learnings of that really still held true even in a US culture. And what I realized was that I was a much better communicator than when I left the US. And because I was in a situation where every day there's a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier, and I started to train myself to think how to lead and how to manage. So how to better communicate projects or direction, how to be really clear, how to motivate the teams around this kind of pushing from the side. And so I was able to bring that back when I went back to the US, and the teams there were like, you give really clear direction. I didn't realize that I had built up this muscle.
What does it mean to give like extra clear direction? I mean, I assume all managers think they're doing a good job. I know they're not, and I know I'm not. Okay, let's just be clear about that. But
I work on it every day. I think we all work on it. This is one thing that I firmly believe. Like, I think as leaders, people leaders, you're going to make mistakes every day.
Every day.
I don't think that there's an angle. I don't think there's a perfect leader. I've relieved myself of that. And now I just try to be better. And like, if I make mistakes, I don't beat myself up. It's like, you were too whatever in this situation, like, just be better. Be better tomorrow.
I have a psychologist on retainer here with the MMA. So I'm a big believer in your sociologist thing. Like, people just need help. You need to connect it. And especially we try to move pretty fast on things.
Yeah.
And I said to him one time, I says, I think what I'm doing is I'm just a CEO of a small company, nothing compared to a Nissan, of course, anything like that. But I said, I'm just trying to be a little better every day, like you would at golf, because you're never perfect at golf. And the game changes and the terrain changes and each hole is different and you're never perfect, but you're in a pursuit of perfection, but never coming close as far as I'm concerned.
I completely agree, because, and I refer to myself as a recovering perfectionist.
Oh, funny. Yeah.
It was really my time in Japan. I really failed a lot. And it was culture failure. It was a communication failure. It was personal life failure. I was working crazy hours. Just, global jobs can be kind of a grind sometimes, but
totally.
I failed a lot. And I, as somebody who had been pretty successful in their career up to that point, it was super humbling. And I kind of, had to kind of sit with it for a little bit and just realize, like, this is not about perfection, actually. This is about learning. It's about progress, and stop beating yourself up about it. What did you learn? And move on.
And it sounds like some of those concepts. So you've been made a better executive by the experience of having, I guess at some level, to be so sensitive or nuanced to what's happening with you there in a new culture, whether that be Amsterdam or maybe Japan. But then all that sort of served you well in the times you've had either come back to the US or otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's because I've thrown myself into like uncomfortable situations and had to work my way out of them. And how do I succeed? How do I drive value? How do I build a great team? And something that I don't know, there's no playbook for, and there's resistance and all these things. And so I've realized, and I have like an article series on LinkedIn that I write about outside the comfort zone, because I really feel like that helped me. I grew more and I developed more in the 2 years that I was in Japan than probably my entire career up until that point, just because of this absolutely failing and the recovery from that.
And when you say that, are you speaking specific to your first time in Japan? Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, that is. And I think there was so much development that came. And I would say, coming back the second time, the culture shock is different. It's still there, but I'm aware of what the situations are. And when I encounter them, I already have tools that I can try to work my way through.
I admire you doing that. Listen, I was at Y&R for many years. I did a lot of work with Y&R Dentsu. And I went to Japan a lot. And at some point after I left Y&R, I had Dentsu call me a lot to kind of come and do consulting work. And I'll tell you, you're a better person than me. I eventually backed away from it because what I found, and I'm not here, I'm enamored by cultures and their idiosyncrasies. I don't want to diminish them, but I found in working with Japanese, I never knew what was going on. I had great difficulty. I couldn't read the signals. And for me, that was very difficult because I'm very good nuanced in my own culture. I get it. I run a trade association. That is a lot of politics to manage.
Yes.
But I never felt like I knew. And I didn't have the time or the immersion you did to do that. So I would find that very interesting. But it's hard for any culture, I think.
It is hard. The meetings are never the meetings. Yeah. The decisions are kind of made outside of that. It's very difficult to have direct discussions because culturally that's not really accepted. You have to be very careful. Yeah. And, I'm naturally a direct person. And then also working with German brands who are like very direct. The Dutch are very direct. I'm American. I'm very direct. Very. And you have to make sure that you don't disrupt or create an environment where there isn't a safe space. Again, like, I make mistakes all the time and I still do, but it's like the quick recovery and and I have an executive coach that I've been working with for a few years. And now I have one that specializes in Japanese culture. And it's kind of like the pause, making sure that how do you frame things when you're trying to provide critical feedback? And if something isn't meeting your expectations, again, how do you push from the side?
I love that point there too. If I can ask you about that a little bit, having a coach. So like I mentioned, I've had a psychologist. He's got a PhD in organizational psych, very serious, very good school. And he's been working with me for 10 years here just to help the team kind of get the alignment we need to kind of move quickly. I actually think in my experience now, I hope I look back and go, I think not having a coach, I don't know how people do it if they don't have an outside, like there's not an athlete in the world that performs without a coach, not one anywhere that I can imagine.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you, if you want to be high performance in business, which you do, I do.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you have that? What do you get from that experience, by the way?
Yeah. And I think the first time I ever heard about executive coaching was Lori Senecal, actually. And so she was the CEO of Kirschbaum Bond, Senecal and Partners. And I remember at the time I was thinking, and I would, I was still early in my career, just thinking like, why does she need a coach? She's CEO. She should, she knows everything. Like, why
I love it. At that level, you think, yes, they know everything. Yes. Let me a little secret there. We don't know everything.
You actually don't know anything.
You don't know anything.
We're just trying to get information and hopefully make a good decision. The first time that Nissan offered it, coaching to me, I jumped at the chance to understand it. And actually the first coach I had, I actually paid for myself. And it was a coach that excelled in creative thinkers and the nuances that we have and how to kind of navigate being a creative thinker in a corporate culture. The thing that I think I get the most out of coaching is that it helps round out my edges.
Wait, but Allyson, you don't strike me. If I can say, people, the listener can't see you here, but they can look up your picture. You look like the nicest person in the world.
I can understand that. I think what it is that, if people ask me kind of what's my style, I was like, I'm tough, but I'm fair. And I have high expectations. And sometimes high expectations can be misunderstood as tough. And I think that's where I work on my nuances. And it's never, and I'm not mean spirited. I don't have time to hold grudges. I'm just trying to get stuff done. And I have high expectations.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so it's how can I get teams to also have equally high expectations? That's the nuance.
Yeah. Yeah. I got that. You're right. I've said to people, I said, you think I'm tough on you? You have no idea how tough I am on myself. Like that's what people don't sort of, and that, that's sort of self-effacing. There's some funny comment to that, but yeah, no, I totally agree. I find it really valuable too, because sometimes I think things can kind of get lost in translation. Funny enough, we're talking about you in Japan, but things that get lost in translation or people misperceive, or I bring a series of biases to either any situation, either the contextual or long-term, my childhood, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But it's like I bring in a series of things and so does the other person. And sometimes you just can kind of miss that sometimes. So if you can find that sort of alignment, and sometimes you need a little help to do that. I think too, I use a coach just to find like I have biases in my thinking sometimes too. That's what I'm often doing. I'm saying like, okay, here's how I'm looking at it. Is there anything about how I'm looking at this is wrong? Is there anything that's tapping into my own pathology that I'm not getting right in thinking through this situation? Because it is about, you said earlier, it's about making the best decisions you can with the information you have as often quickly as you can.
Yeah. I read Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, and it was just it was that moment of there's this chapter on listening.
Yeah.
And in the chapter, it talks about how the ear is kind of the only organ that's all about the intake. It's there to take in information. And they talk about, and I am notoriously bad about, like as someone's talking, trying to formulate my argument. And I've come to learn to stop doing that as much as you human possibly can, but to really listen to what they're saying. The thing that stuck out to me in the book is that if you're not listening, you could miss a great idea. Totally. And I was like, well, I don't want to miss a great idea. I need all the ideas.
Yeah. Listen, we're in dangerous territory because if anybody on my team listens to this and they wonder whether or not, and they hear me talk about acknowledging your like, hey, how valuable listening is, I'm going to hear about that later. So I think we should move on.
That's fair.
Because they know that I'm a true New Yorker.
Yes.
And it's more important, that I speak loudly, forcefully, aggressively in every moment. In fact, I think the way our New Yorkers describe it is very good. It's like, this is New Yorkers. It's like, if anybody tells you a story, the New Yorker will always watch any of you out there. They will always they'll go, oh yeah, wait till you hear what happened to me.
Yep.
Like that.
Yeah. I lived in New York for like 13 years and it was, it's always the like, let's go. I can match you on this, this, and this.
Exactly. Let's go there right now. Exactly. Yep. It's time for our favorite question. What do CMOs get wrong? We'll find out what Allyson Witherspoon thinks in a minute. But first, let's take a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Thanks for listening to Building Better CMOs. If you have a second, I'd like to ask a quick favor. Take your phone out and share this episode with someone else. It's all about making marketers better. You could text it to a coworker or a friend, easy. Or you can post it on LinkedIn and tell people why you liked it. There's one other thing that you can do to help Building Better CMOs, and that's to leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. There's a link to do it in the show notes. However you support us, I really appreciate it. Thank you. This is Greg Stuart. Now back to the show. This is Building Better CMOs. Let's get back to my conversation with Allyson Witherspoon, the global CMO of Nissan. Let's go here to the main topic, okay? I think this is kind of a good segue here. So, listen, you're talking about being better. So the thesis of the MMA, as I mentioned to you, as a nonprofit trade association, what do we do to fix stuff? What do we do to make marketers better? And so I always like to ask the guests, given the unique perch that you have, the place that you sit, what do you think? And, this is not to be negative to others or anything else, but it's like, what do you think marketing or marketers don't get right? What do they either maybe don't understand? What do you think they could be better at? What's the missing gaps? I mean, if it's good, if it's something I can work on, maybe the MMA takes it on, but it's like, what do you think we as marketers don't appreciate enough, Allyson?
I think where we need some improvement right now is really in creativity and the importance of creativity. And the reason why I say that is because we have so much technology. There's so many channels. There's so many tools to be the most, to deliver an efficient message that I think we have lost the art of how to create an impactful message. And I think about like DCO and even kind of AI. To me, technology and tools are a means to an end.
Yeah.
But it's the creative that's actually really going to impact consumers, connect with consumers, impact them, help change perception. And I think we need to find the balance of how do you do that, leveraging these tools and this technology.
Okay. Well, I probably should have figured that out. I think in LinkedIn, don't you have, isn't like your banner up there
Yes.
says creativity is queen?
Yes.
I think that's what something,
Yes.
is that right? Okay.
Yes, that is right.
Okay. So creativity so first off, it is the underlying foundation of the business, and it's probably why most of us got into the industry. So that's great. Let's go down that path. Is it about the big idea? Like I said, I know John Bond pretty well.
Yeah.
And so I watched that agency. I remember when I was a young pup in the business when they started. It's been that long. And they were about the big stunt more, I think.
The big idea.
The big idea, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. But is it about the big idea, which is important? So maybe riff on that, because I know you're going to go there on that. But is your thinking just really, though, that we're communicating clearly, or that we're communicating uniquely with consumers? Like, what's the filters, the questions you ask yourself as you're looking at work, maybe is one way to look at that.
To me, it's about how do you connect with consumers? Like, how do you make something that's compelling that will connect with them? I 100% believe in the big idea. And I think everything needs to ladder up to what that big idea is. And that's essentially, what do you want consumers to take away from this? And we have 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 15 seconds, 60 seconds, you have like like less than split seconds. How do we communicate that key takeaway that we want consumers to understand? How do we communicate that in a compelling way? And I think automotive, it can be highly technical. And, if we get lost in trying to explain in a 6-second ad about how a hybrid engine works, we're going to lose people. And so how do you actually have a message that's super clear about what the benefit is to them and something that will visually engage them? And so to me, I think that's where, again, I think like DCO is great, because that way you can create a lot of assets, but you still have to think about what is that visual, what is that message? And I think that can get lost in the objective to create, content factories, these massive creative libraries. And I've done that. We've done that. And I think some of that is because there's so many different ways to reach consumers. It's just the nature of the beast, but it doesn't remove the importance of actually what you say to consumers. It doesn't remove that at all. It actually becomes even more important.
I heard you talk about DCO, and you've mentioned it here, a couple of times in talking to us. I want to talk about that, because there's a part of me so listen, I remember when DCO first created. In fact, I almost went and ran a DCO company, but I never really thought the performance sort of justified the energy and effort. Like, it didn't go far enough. Okay. Now, I will to be fair to you, the MMA has been running a series of AI personalization studies. And it's basically, it's kind of DCO on steroids, okay? It's really just amped at a level I've never seen. And the performance is extraordinary. So there's a part of me that says, okay, well, that's great for performance, because now I'm personalizing ads. I'm making that work. But you're right, DCO is not it's a I don't know, it's a manufactured ad. It's like a synthetic ad. It's not like a real ad that somebody sat and put the elements together. So would you have in your mind how you balance those kind of dynamics?
Yeah. And I think, to me, it is more synthetic, but I think it's the personalization piece of it. And I think that's what makes it really impactful, because I think there's a creative message, but there's also like, how do you connect with that person? And I think that's where personalization, it's also a method of creativity. As a marketer, it's more of like, some of that is happening behind the scenes. It's happening through, data, audience segmentation. It's happening through insights that are kind of coming through in split seconds. But to me, that is the impact. But that's why I think it's important. You need to understand what the audiences are. You need to understand what are their motivators, and then how and where do you connect with them, and what do you say? And I think all of that is important. And I think then, DCO just becomes the tool to enable that.
Got it. I mean, listen, you're going down the path too. I mean, listen, we've all worked now with ChatGPT fun. We've all had our fun, and we've tried to have it write our speeches or our blogs or whatever, right? Okay. And I think today, so far, I've had some success, but it generally feels like it feels a little flat. It somehow takes it's not it takes the creativity off. It takes the edge out of it in some regards. I don't like it. Just doesn't feel like it kind of accomplishes. Is that kind of what you're talking about? That it becomes sort of dull at some level, or
Yes, but AI, generative AI is another example of that because I think it's an enabler. I think it helps at the starting point of something. And, and we use
agreed.
AI
Agreed.
in vehicle
Agreed.
design. I think the buzz about AI it's foundational in what we do actually at this point.
Yeah.
It's an enabler, but I think, a brand still needs to differentiate from everyone else. And, automotive is incredibly competitive. And so if everyone is using AI and the data set is the same for everyone, then what's going to be differentiated if everyone uses the same thing? And so that's why I think you have to have a very clear view of who you are as a brand. And then these become enablers and tools, but you still need that creative mind. You still need a strong point of view as a brand and as a marketer in order to kind of fully leverage that capability. It's a means to the end, but it's not what's going to drive results.
I have a corresponding podcast I do for the MMA's AI work called Decoding AI for Marketing. And we had somebody on there, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but they pointed out and listen, by the way, I'm a huge believer in AI.
Yeah.
I do think it's the future, the revolution, and I'm all in, and I'm just super enamored to see where the world's going to go and what's going to happen. We're at a phase right now. Okay. But they said a funny thing. They said, when they have a creative brainstorming, they go, if AI came up with 7 of their 10 ideas, they didn't do it well enough. And so in other words, what he was saying is that, AI is okay, maybe starting point, but you got to get beyond that to really bring in the soul, I think, of what you're trying to get at. That was a funny point. Yeah.
I fully agree. And I think to me, it's the starting point of something. When you first start to sit down to kind of write a strategy, that takes a lot of time, actually. And I think this can actually be an accelerator. AI can be an accelerator in moments like that. I think AI is definitely an accelerator in a lot of things that we can do creatively, but you do have to take it. It does take human thinking to get it above and beyond. And that's even, in discussions with our head of design, it's the same thing. It's a starting point. It's the accelerator. It will help get to it faster, but the final product is not going to be fully generative AI.
When you're looking at ads, when you're ultimately reviewing these ads and you're looking for the creativity dynamic, I'm just wondering, do you think more at design? Are you looking more at the communication in it, the visuals, that there's an art to it, if there's people or something else? What do you think you're keying in on? Do you know what you're kind of looking for?
It's interesting because it's, in 2020, when I was CMO for the US, we set out to kind of do some repositioning because we needed to move beyond some of the things that were happening from our recent past. And so we did a positioning and we really sat down and it was cross-functional. It was one of those scary meetings where you're like, it was R&D, HR, purchasing, finance, design, captive finance, sales, everybody.
Why is that a scary meeting, by the way? I know. I just want you to say it.
Yeah, because everyone has an opinion. Everyone has an opinion. And sometimes navigating everyone's opinion is actually a very difficult and skilled thing that is required of marketers.
Really?
Yes.
I'm surprised. And you're in the center. You're going to laugh at this, not the sideways too much. I want to come back to what you're looking for in the ads. But I'm in the middle of doing a positioning now with the MMA. So my meeting the other day was working through the position of the MMA with the CMOs of AT&T, McDonald's, General Motors. I was like, oh, I'm way in over my head on this. I can't even imagine I'm the world's greatest marketer.
Yeah, exactly.
Looking at my little company's positioning statement.
It's great,
it's very funny. It's a very intimidating kind of environment because you don't know where the world's, you think you got it right, but you don't know if you got it right ever.
Yeah. And I think in this situation, we went through this and we started first with, there's a little bit of catharsis of this is where it hasn't worked. And then we really quickly got into this is where, as a brand, this is what we've done really great in our history. And we landed on this thrill people at every turn. We then turned that into, okay, how does that become a communication platform? And as I started to review creative now, now that we had that, you could feel whether or not we were doing that. And so to me, to answer your question, I think it's much more in the communication, but communication being the visual and the copy and the emotion behind it. And we got to the point with the team that we felt it. We knew whether or not it was there, like on just straight feeling.
And what I heard there too, I think, was that and tied back to the strategy of what
Correct.
we're trying to
always tie it back to the strategy. Always tie it back to the strategy.
You would have known this about me, but I had the opportunity to co-found multi-touch attribution about 20 years ago when I ran the IB.
Nice.
And what they did is it put us in working with, at the time, we did probably 24 studies with marketers trying to understand the dynamics of what multi-touch. We didn't call it multi-touch attribution at the time. We were just coming up with a new measurement technique. But it got us into the brands at a very deep level. Our takeaway was, our conclusion after all those studies is that ads had to survive on three different things, right? It was basically, you had to get the strategy right, you had to get the messaging right, then you had to get the placement right. Okay. The strategy and messaging, because we were extensively testing because we had to, right? That's correct. But it failed 45% of the time. And even if you got the strategy right and the message, like you had to get both. You could muscle by a little bit with maybe good messaging that didn't quite, like there was some nuance to that, obviously, but we were surprised the number of times that it failed. But you're right. It's so right. You have to get it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the placements, I wouldn't say it's a given because there's still kind of the brand safety issues and things like that. But placement is such a, at this point, it's such an automated.
A little bit. Yeah.
You need to have some eyes on that because, it's as somebody who manages a very large budget, you got to know where those ads are showing up and you have to make sure that, and also every single one has to have impact, which is just, I think that's a scary part of being a CMO is that you have to be able to show how it's driving, whatever the KPI is that the brand is kind of hanging their hat on, you have to show how it's driving that.
I don't want to call anybody out here, so we're not important to this. But there are times when you think that the team or you just kind of got it wrong on creativity, where it just kind of didn't work. Like, what would be an example of that, if you can share?
I think there was something that we launched. We moved into this brand, kind of a more branded approach, and typically in automotive, it's like product on, product off, product on, product B on off, product C, product, on off. And typically that doesn't, from a consumer standpoint, especially if you stack them, it's very difficult to try to capture attention. And so we moved in the strategy of kind of more branded messaging. And then right before I moved back to Japan, we were focused on design and the design as one of our brand messages. And I didn't feel like, I think at the end of the day, I don't think that we hit our mark. And I think that we had also, the environment had shifted and we didn't react quickly enough to it. And that's where, if I could do it again, I would have tried to push harder because I don't think we were just slightly off where the market was going.
So you said just it could have been right at a moment in time, but it was no longer right. Oh, yeah. Wow. That's really hard.
Yeah, that is hard.
I had the chief brand officer from Adobe here on one of our recent podcast episodes tell me that they had created a campaign with 5,000 creative assets. Is that true today?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and sometimes every once in a while I hear kind of even some of our marketing teams in different parts of the world, it's like, oh, it's 3,000. And I've definitely done it too. A question that I get a lot is like, so does your production budgets go up? No, they don't.
Right.
They don't.
Right.
We actually have to be smarter and probably go down. But yeah, and I think the reason for that is because there's so many ways of reaching consumers now.
It's crazy.
And we know so much about what they're motivated by. And so you have all these insights. And I think that, and then all these channels and all these different ways. And then you have creative fatigue, and social media is much different than it is on television. And I think that's why you get to that. That's why I still kind of go back to like every single one of those has to have impact. And if it's something that's going to be more, dynamically generated or generative AI, or that's why it's like, what is the data that's going to be driving that? And then what is that messaging formula that you have that's going to be attached to that? That's what becomes really, really important.
Wow. I can't even imagine having the oversight. I mean, even if you laid that out end to end, it probably wouldn't fit in anybody's office. So, yeah.
No. And I think sometimes and I say this to my team a lot, I think sometimes sometimes marketers can be disconnected, or they can feel disconnected from other parts of organizations because it feels like it's very creative, but actually it's very, very business oriented. And marketers ironically enough, we don't necessarily do the best job of marketing what we do.
Oh, no, we're terrible.
And that was a huge learning for me. We're terrible at it. We are terrible.
Terrible.
Because we're scared. We want to protect it. And then we don't tell anybody. And what I've learned is that you have to get it out there. You have to like, we're doing this and this AI, yep, on it here. And we can't shy away from those conversations. And we need to proactively, like, don't wait for the CFO to be asking how you're leveraging generative AI. Don't ask. Right. Don't wait for the CEO asking you about these things. And you have to market what you're doing. And there is a situation where like a very prominent person went and pitched AI leveraging audience segmentation to one of our local CEOs but as like a new idea. And it was so funny because like the marketing team in the room was like, this is so run the business. This is foundational. And of course, everyone's trying to like get more business and stuff. And I think the learning from that is like, if you're doing that, find a way to make sure that everyone knows that you're doing that. Like find ways to drop those little tidbits and sound bites to prevent kind of the distraction that things like that can become.
Well, I used to have a guy I worked with, I call him merchandising. He says, always be merchandising was kind of his phrase. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Always.
Okay. Hey, let's kind of wrap up. Let's talk about AI for a little bit. Because you mentioned a few times here. I know that it's a big deal for you. It's a big deal for the auto industry already. I mean, this is nothing new for design and everybody else. But have you given an overarching, how are you looking at ingesting AI and either generative AI or machine learning, any one of those into marketing? What's the mandate maybe you've given the team? What's the direction? Is there a goal that you've set? What are you thinking? And where do you think opportunity? Eventually here, I want to get to like, where's their real opportunity, you think?
Yeah. And I have given that challenge to the team. And what I've told them is that we need to be open to this. And I want to see the teams experimenting with it. And so the challenge has been more like, let's start experimenting with it. And the way that I view it is as an accelerator.
Okay. Yeah.
Really an accelerator, like we discussed a little bit earlier. It's the accelerator for that starting point. It can become this accelerator enabler. And so that's what I've been encouraging the teams to be doing is just start experimenting with it. Obviously, we use it in a lot of, like we said, like audience segmentation, buying, it's so foundational when it comes to media at this point. And so some of that is already foundational, but it's more about how can we bring it into strategy if we're stuck on a problem or we're stuck with how to solve something, then how do we leverage AI? And it's things, under, my responsibility is kind of all the brand merchandising. We have a concept of an idea, and I think the teams were not quite sure how to start it. And so I was like, well, just use generative AI just as the starting point. Like where is there quality manufacturers of this type of merchandise, apparel as an example. And it's like, just use it just to see. And so that's how I'm trying to encourage the team. We actually have an internal objective of ours is to do these kind of proof of concepts. Yep. And so to me, it's more about how do we just start to expose ourselves to what the technology can deliver and experiment with it.
Do you have examples of either experiments you're running? I think ultimately what listeners would find helpful is where do we think the heat map for opportunities are? Like I mentioned, we're doing this AI personalization, a kind of a DCO on steroids, and it's crazy. I've been doing a lot of measurement of media marketing for a lot of years. I've never seen anything like this. So for me, that concept of personalization using in this case, machine learning is really powerful. What do you see some of the opportunities?
I think that's the perfect example. And like I said, kind of social media wear out happens so much faster. So how can you refresh assets leveraging AI and that particularly like backgrounds and things like that? I think the other thing where we really see it is that, and this is such a tactical example, but it's storyboards. Oh, right. And remember, it used to take like 2 weeks to get the storyboards and like that's AI. We use AI for that. It's been inspiration for us, but the design team, we went to our design center, which is, kind of an hour away from our headquarters here in Japan. And they did an entire presentation through AI, which I thought, if we can help alleviate a lot of resource spending, writing PowerPoints, I'm all in. So
all in. Exactly.
I'm all in on that. And so to me, it's really about those starting points of things and like, where are the pain points of where do we see that things take a lot of time? How do we inject generative AI into that? Because I think machine learning, when it comes to media, and AI, when it comes to that, that's pretty foundational. That's not new, after a few
not
years
so
of
uncommon.
this.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's just more about what are those other opportunities. And like I said, like naming is also kind of part of my purview. And, sometimes you can get really stuck on names. And so the teams are now starting to do, kind of like, here's some AI generated ones. These are our generated ones. And so I think it's just helping to speed up a lot of these processes that, have been pretty manual for a long time. It's helped us to speed that up.
Yeah, the annoying parts of our job can be taken away, right?
Yeah.
By the way, does it happen there? We were getting the question here from teams, is it going to replace my job?
No.
Is it going to, did that come up there at all? Did Japanese ever ask that kind of thing, or yeah?
I mean, we've discussed it a lot. I think will it replace your job? Will AI replace your job? No. Will a person who can query AI replace your job? Potentially, yes.
Yes, exactly.
That's why I think, these prompt engineers, that's a skill that I think everyone, especially marketers, need to learn. The first thing that I had somebody that was, fortunately, I had kind of an expert in this help kind of guide me as I started to experiment with it personally. He was like, take a look at it. And he's like, start a chat and keep it in the same one and ask it to be an advisor to you as a global chief marketing officer. I never say the brand. I never say anything specific. And he's like, just ask it to do that and give feedback, like start to work on your prompts, give feedback if you're not getting it. And I was asking it, I was prompting like, how do I, influence our CFO for, XYZ and all these things. And it just like, it was fascinating to me to see that, because like the immediate reaction, but also just the like, it suddenly meant that research and things like that could be so much faster than having to go through like searches and where these analog, backdated, whatever it is, it's suddenly can be so instantaneous. And that was such a tedious part of like a strategy, especially.
Right. And I agree with you on prompt engineering. I think it's a pretty big deal. I've taken a few classes in that. The idea is that you really do have to push the machine to give you what you want. And it's in some regards, it's kind of where we started sort of earlier. It's funny enough. If you don't learn how to give good, clear direction, if you don't learn how to sort of massage and manage things, there was a study I saw not too long ago where they actually went into one of the GPTs and they were basically saying, they said, what happens when you're polite to the machine? Do you get a different response for the research they were doing? And they did. The machine, because the machine is the LLMs are just an amalgamations of what sort of people believe.
Oh, for sure.
That's why bias comes through sometimes still. But it was responsive to those kinds of things. So, and I don't remember the examples, but it could have been something like, if you said pretty please, it would give you a different answer. Or like, they say, could you really, really try at this for me? Like you were giving a more human kind of reaction and the machine responded to those. They had different reactions. Crazy.
And that's what I just find absolutely fascinating. And I remember somebody sent me an article. They were trying to, Nike, incredible brand. They were trying to see if AI could generate a more impactful headline than I forget. It must have like Caitlin Clark, and it, had to do with the NCAA the finals and Caitlin Clark, and it shows like what the prompts were and what and it's just really fascinating to how the LLM responds to you and how you input information. I feel like, and I think this is an important trait for anyone in marketing, but I'm an endlessly curious person. And so this stuff, and I can get to the end of the internet on any kind of topic if I really have the time to do it.
You would do it. If anybody would do it, you say you would do it.
I would absolutely do it. But this is where I just think it's like, I'm so curious. So like, I'm excited. I'm curious. I'm a little scared, but that's why I encourage my team to really lean in and see where it can complement us, complement what we, like what we're already doing. How can it complement and accelerate what we're doing?
I am totally on board with you. I think it's going to be the most exciting thing ever. I can't imagine what it means. I hope still I keep up at my age. I don't, because I am curious. I think I will, but like, is this the one time the world moves beyond where I am? I don't know. It's just, and it is moving so fast. It's just sort of crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. Yeah, it is.
Allyson, I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Yeah,
It's been so much fun. I listened to one of your other podcasts. I went into this one and go, oh my God, she's going to be so easy. You're just so easy to kind of communicate and talk. And you do have that natural curiosity. That's what I didn't know exactly what it was. I didn't form my thoughts on it, but that's right. You just have a curiosity to try to figure out the world. What a great trait for a marketer. Obviously why you're a CMO of Nissan. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. You're the best.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks again to Allyson Witherspoon from Nissan for coming on Building Better CMOs. Check the description of this episode for links to connect with Allyson. If you want to know more about MMA's work to make marketing matter more, visit MMAglobal.com, or you can attend any of our 44 conferences in the 16 countries where MMA operates, or really just write me, Greg, at MMAglobal.com. Thank you so much for listening. Tap the link in the description to leave us a review. And if you're new to the show, please follow or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, or wherever you get your podcast. You can find links to all those places and more at buildingbettercmos.com. Our producer and podcast consultant is Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Artwork is by Jason Chase, and a special thanks to Angela Gray and Dan Whiting for making this happen. This is Greg Stewart. See you in 2 weeks.